In a small, quiet town, there lived a young man named David. He had taken on a huge responsibility after his parents died in a tragic accident a few years earlier. Since then, David had been caring for his older sister, Sarah. Sarah had never spoken a single word since birth, and her silence was a mystery to the villagers and doctors. David, out of love and duty, devoted his life to her. She followed him everywhere, like a shadow. Sarah had no friends, but she loved watching David play soccer. David had once been offered a scholarship to a top university, but he turned it down because of Sarah. He knew she needed him, and although it was hard to take care of her, David never complained. His love for Sarah was stronger than his struggles. But then, one day, David fell seriously ill. The doctors told him he only had a few months left to live. All he could think about was Sarah. Who would take care of her when he was gone? He went around the town, asking for help, but nobody wanted to take on the responsibility. Sarah's silence and dependence made her a difficult person to look after. The rejection hurt David deeply, but not as much as the decision he soon had to make, one no one should ever have to make. As the days went by, David's thoughts grew darker. He didn't want to leave Sarah behind to suffer. One evening, he went to the woods to collect some plants that were known for their medicinal properties, but also their ability to end life. That night, after dinner, David sat with Sarah and told her how much he loved her. He explained that taking care of her had become too hard, and it was time for them to be with Mama and Papa again. His voice shook as he spoke, weighed down by the terrible thing he was about to do. David went into the kitchen and made their usual tea. When he came back, Sarah was sitting at the table, her face as calm as always. She drank her tea quickly, like she always did. But David hesitated. He stared into his cup, unsure. Just then, Sarah began to shake and convulse violently. Tears poured down David's face as the reality of what he had done hit him. Sarah slumped over, lifeless. Heartbroken and horrified, David buried her in the backyard, under a small tree she used to sit by. But even after burying her, he found no peace. His nights were filled with nightmares, and he couldn't sleep. His guilt ate away at him like a wild animal. 2 weeks later, David was at the market buying some fruits. He overheard the local policeman talking to residents about a missing woman, a girl about Sarah's age. David tried to ignore it, still drowning in his own grief. When he reached the fruit vendor to buy mangoes, the vendor smiled at him and said, "David, it's been a while. Your sister was just here buying 12 mangoes." David froze. His heart pounded in his chest. "My sister?" he whispered. "Yes, Sarah," the vendor replied. "She was just here." David rushed home, his mind spinning. When he got to the backyard, he checked Sarah's grave. It was undisturbed, just as he had left it. Confused and scared, David tried to go on with his day, but the vendor's words haunted him. The next morning, as he walked into the kitchen, his heart nearly stopped. On the table were 16 mangoes, neatly piled up. He felt a shiver run down his spine. Was Sarah still here? He ran to the backyard, but the grave was still untouched. Then, he noticed something, footprints leading back to the house. Shaking with fear, David went back inside. Sitting at the table was Sarah. She stared at him with an intensity he had never seen before. Then, she spoke for the first time in her life. "What have you done, David? Who have you killed?" David's blood ran cold. His mind struggled to make sense of what was happening. Sarah, who had never spoken, was now accusing him of murder. But hadn't he killed her? Was she real? In a panic, David grabbed a shovel and ran to the backyard. He dug frantically, dirt flying everywhere. Sarah followed, watching him silently. When he finally uncovered the body, he was horrified. It wasn't Sarah. It was the missing girl from the village. David's vision blurred as reality slipped away from him. Sarah's voice echoed in his head. "Who have you killed, David? Who have you killed?" In a fit of madness, David turned on her, swinging the shovel with all his strength. He struck her again and again until she was lifeless. He buried her next to the other girl, sealing the grave with shaking hands. Hours passed, and when David finally went back into the house, Sarah was sitting there, just as before, calm and quiet. The nightmare wasn't over. David collapsed, his mind broken. When he woke up the next morning, she was gone, as if she had never been there. He wandered to the market, where the policeman was now asking about another missing girl. David's world was falling apart. Was it all in his head? In desperation, David ran home, grabbed the shovel, and started digging again. This time, when he uncovered the body, it wasn't Sarah. It was the girl who had just gone missing. He screamed, crushed by the weight of what he had done. Without thinking, he packed his belongings, poured kerosene over the house, and set it on fire. As the flames rose, he boarded a bus, desperate to escape. David sat with his head down, trying to catch his breath. Then, someone sat next to him. Slowly, he turned, his heart racing. There she was, Sarah, staring at him with her silent eyes. Terrified, David pushed her aside, ran to the front of the bus, kicked open the door, and jumped out, the ground rushing up to meet him as he fell to his death.